because it weighs close to 50 pounds, 60 pounds. And it's not a good way to hold it, you know. You can't bend the way you're supposed to. You do everything wrong. Hey everybody, David Burns here. Thanks for being with me again. I want to thank you all for watching my last video on how to store these honey supers. A lot of good subscribers on that, so thank you for subscribing. This is part 2, so if you haven't watched part 1 of storing honey supers, please do, but I want to continue with what do you do with these honey supers as far as placing them. I want to show you specifically what I do with them and where I'm going to put them now. I'm also going to answer some other topics, like in this video I'm going to show you how to wrap a hive for winter. I'm also going to show you how to put a candy board on top for winter. We're going to talk about treating for mites now that it's fall. A lot of you ask me questions about, can I still treat for mites? Is it warm enough? And I'm going to answer that question. I'm also going to answer the question about, do you close off the bottom board for winter? Do you leave the screen open or closed? And while you're treating for mites, there's some specific ways to use those Mite Away quick strips, specifically whether you close off the bottom board or not, whether you can feed the bees while you're treating for mites. So I'm going to answer all of those questions coming up. Let's get started. So if you remember in our last video, we stacked all these supers up here to, this is a feeding station, feeding down below. But today the temperature is only 46 degrees. I have 1 or 2 bees and that's about it. There's one there. So we're gonna go ahead and take these off and store them for winter. I had them on here just so the bees could kind of clean out the wet honey. So let me show you this. And we'll see what it looks like now the bees have had a few days to work it over and get all the honey off. I put a little rock here so the bees could fly up under the top cover. And if you remember in my other video, these frames were pretty wet. And you can see now how dry these are. The bees have taken away all of that wet honey that was in there, and these are ready to be stored. But because I've had them outdoors before it turned cold, there's still a chance that some wax moths may have flown in here and laid eggs because I had them out here in the open. So what I recommend you doing at this point is freeze them again just to be safe. If you had them outdoors for the bees to clean up the wet supers, take them back inside, freeze them for a couple of days, and that way we can make sure there's no wax moth in there. And so in my first video I showed you what happens if wax moths get inside. So if you take a look at this, these supers, I want to show you a couple of things. One mistake that beekeepers make, and I think I mentioned this in my last video, is that beekeepers will actually store their supers in a trash bag. So these honey frames have all been cleaned out by the bees, as you can see. These are nice combs. They've been extracted, and I can store these. Oh, look at that. I want to show you this. This is a good example right here. If you look what I just saw, this is a wax moth. So these have been out in the open here, and there's a wax moth. So that tells me I've got to freeze these again in case she laid some eggs in here. I'm glad we saw that. Now we're going to have a frost in a few days and we won't have to worry about these anymore. But this is what happens when you let these combs kind of get eaten out by bees. You have other things that will come and do bad things to these combs. Here's another wax moth that we can see. Look at that right here. It's kind of cold, so they're not moving around very good. But this is another reason why you need to make sure you freeze your comb before you store it for winter. Oh, there's another moth. Look at that. A moth of a different color. Wow, this is really good to know that you can't trust. I mean, if you freeze them once, you've got to make sure if you put them outside again and it's been warm enough where the wax moth can fly around and get back in here, freeze them again. But some beekeepers, I'm going to freeze these, but some beekeepers will actually take their honey supers like this and they'll put them in a trash bag like this. Now, if I had not noticed that wax moth, if I was a new beginner beekeeper, I might think this is going to be good, this would be helpful. I can just put it in here, I can seal it off, maybe tape it really good, and there's a wasp, and then I can just leave it like this and store this somewhere all year long. The problem is that wax moth would have laid eggs in here, and next spring when I open it up, this will all be destroyed. The larva will eat through the comb and it will all be destroyed for spring. So that's not this trash bag is not an option. Do not put your supers in a trash bag. Another mistake beekeepers make is they store their honey supers like this down in their basement. Most basements, even with a dehumidifier, something could go wrong with the dehumidifier and maybe it fills up with water and all of a sudden the basement becomes too humid. And the humidity will cause your supers to actually mildew and mold. So I would not suggest you store your honey supers in your basement unless your basement is at least 50% dry, humidity is about 50% or less. If it gets above 50, find a better place to store your honey supers or you'll be really disappointed. Also, even now, if this is a dry basement, there's an access to outdoors, and again, wax moths could still find their way in through the door when you go in and out and find these supers, so be careful of that. So I'm inside my training center where we teach a lot of our beekeeping classes. Now this would be the perfect room to store these honey supers because after I have frozen them and killed off any wax moth or small hive beetle eggs, then I can store them in here. This room is always kept at about 70 to 75 degrees and air conditioning is running in the summer. It's dry in the winter time. So you can just set up a little place over here in a corner of a nice room that you have climate controlled. You can sometimes maybe put them in a garage if your garage is enclosed and you keep the door shut quite often in the winter time. You got to watch out that you don't have an infestation of mice or ants when you store these in the wintertime. Of course, those critters will get in there and start destroying the comb too. So make sure that they're in a safe place away from pests that might come in there and eat them up. But remember, store them in a room that's climate controlled. And if I stack another one, I like to stagger the arrangement. So I'll pick one up and put it like this. I get the next one and put it like this. And by doing this, I'm allowing, ventilation to go through the supers in this climate controlled room all winter long. Now, some of you may be unable to have a climate controlled room, and if you want to store these outside, I've done that before. But you're going to have to wait and put them outside after you've had some really hard freezes to kill all the wax moth and bugs. And then when I store them outside, I usually put a top cover down, upside down, and I'll put a super in the top cover and I'll stack all my supers together. But outdoors, I stack them so that they are sealed off really well because I want to keep the mice out. So if these were being stored outdoors, I would do it this way, and then after I've got them all stacked up, I put a top cover on top with a brick, because now this can only be done in really northern cold climates. So if it's hot outside, you're never going to get away from all your pests. But in the north, we can store them like this after it's turned cold, and that way no other wax moth or bugs are going to get in here. The mice can, that's why you want to use your upside down top cover at the bottom and a top cover on top so everything's sealed off, and the cold temperatures will keep these just like they're in a freezer all winter long. Okay, so this is a hive that we're going to prepare for winter. A lot of you ask me what sorts of things do I do to get ready for winter. This hive does not have a super on it. I took it off. It's just going to go through the winter with 2 deeps. It's on a hive stand that's about 6 to 10 inches off the ground. So in this case, my very traditional method of overwintering here in central Illinois is to put my Winter Be Kind candy board on. Here's the Winter Be Kind that I use to overwinter my hives with. We sell a lot of these to customers around the U.S. And I'm going to show you how to put it on, and then I'm going to show you how to wrap the hive. So let's get started. Okay, so it's about 45, 46 degrees on a fall afternoon right now. It's a little bit earlier than I put my Winter Be Kinds on. It's in October now, middle of October. I usually wait until, deep into November, even December and January. But we're going to go ahead and do it just to show you. I'm going to try to do it without putting on any protective gear. Oh wow, it's a lot of bees up there. It's a cold day, so you can see the bees are clustered on one side right over here. You want to put the candy facing down like this, and those bees will begin to eat that sugar candy. Look a little bit, see what it looks like when bees are feeding on this. You can see it's some of the candy the bees are eating, and they purposely drop it down toward more of the bottom of the cluster, where the cluster's lower. They're just eating away that good food. Once you put that on, you want to put your top cover back on. I've got some bees on my top cover here. I'm going to brush them at the entrance and see if I can get them to walk back in. All right. Put the top cover back on like this. Now, I'm going to wrap this hive. Because it's on a hive stand with these little frame holders, I'm going to take them off. And I'll just keep them in a safe place for next spring. And now I can begin wrapping the hive. Since I'm going to leave my screen bottom board open, that means I'm not going to slide anything in there. If I want to, I can close off this entrance with a reducer, but since I'm going to block it off with insulation, I'm going to leave it open. I'm going to push the insulation all the way to the ground and tape it just so I can get it started. Then I'm going to wrap it around right up next to the ground the entire way around. That's why I'm able to keep my screen bottom board open, because there's no wind blowing into the hive. Now this first layer actually only goes almost to the top, but not quite. So then over here I'll just tape it together. Try to make it as tight as you can. And then tape the sections where they overlap. What you want to do now is put your second piece on that goes all the way up to the top. So I'll start right here with another piece of tape to hold it together. I use Gorilla Tape. It really bites in and holds it well. Go all the way around the hive with your wrap. This is what we call batt insulation, B-A-T-T. Go all the way around like this. No rocket science. Find a way that you feel that it's wrapped really well. You can tinker with it to get it to seal off better than I'm doing here. I'm just doing this for video purposes. So once you wrap the hive up, you want to leave a little opening right here for the Winter Be Kind, so the bees can fly in and out. And what I'll do is take a staple gun and I'll staple my insulation to the hive. So you can see the Winter Be Kind opening is right here where my finger's showing, so the bees can fly in and out. And by stapling it right here, it allows the bees to go in and out all winter through this exit right here. And if you want to tidy it up, you can put some more tape around it. Be sure if you're in a real windy place like I am, that you put a lot of tape to hold this secure. So finally, I want to talk to you about the mite quick strips. A lot of you know that I really like those. I don't use them until I have trouble controlling my mites with my green drone comb, with the screen bottom board, powdered sugar dusting, and breaking the queen's brood cycle. If I do those 4 things and I can't control my mites, then I do sometimes fall back on formic acid in the way of mite quick strips. A lot of you ask me in the fall, is it too cold to use mite quick strips? When can I use it? If you look at the manufacturer, what they recommend that the daytime temperature be between 50 and 85 degrees Fahrenheit. So if your daytime temperatures are in that range, you can use those, and you need about 7 days of time where it's going to be between 50 and 85 in the daytime. Don't worry about the low temperatures at night. So you probably in the fall, if you live up north, you're going to have some time in the fall where you're going to have that window of time to use those formic acid strips. The second thing I want to say about that, a lot of you ask me, should I block off the screen bottom board? Again, the manufacturer recommends that you don't trust the screen bottom board as a ventilation. They recommend that you take off your any kind of entrance reducer so that the bees can use ventilation to go pull in and out, push out of the hive. The other thing about if you go too hot, the too hot temperature to use mite quick strips is about 90 to 92. You can have more brood mortality at temperatures above 90. Also, if you go below 50 degrees Fahrenheit, then what happens is the bees are clustered. They're not moving the formic vapors around to kill mites as much. So that's not an advantage to let it go below 50 for daytime temperatures. So I usually use leave my screen bottom boards open, though you certainly can block them off. The manufacturer says to block them off, the screen bottom board, when you use their strips, so that the vapors just don't drop out of the hive. But when you do that, you have to open up the entrance reducer all the way so there can be a kind of a circulation of some ventilation. Okay, everybody, thanks so much for watching. I'm David Burns at honeybeesonline.com. Please check out our website. I have provided a link below in the description of our Winter Be Kind candy boards that you saw me put on this hive. Customers around the country really have loved these for years, and they really think that it helps their bees get through the winter, and I know it does. So please subscribe to our videos. I thank you for watching them. It inspired me to make more, and we'll see you next time. So as she pauses, that's when I start trying to mark her. There, I got a good mark on her that time. So just kind of follow her, and if she starts to pause, that's when we want to put the mark on her. Now she's paused there, but the bees are on her. There, perfect marking there.